it's Rhea. Wherever you are, whatever time it is, I hope you are enjoying yourself. So I've been going through a bit of an artist crisis, which is something that happens fairly often, I want to say, like at least once a season. I just question all reality of my art and where I'm at, where I'm going, and if I even like how I draw or what I draw anymore. And this mainly happened when I looked back on art, since I've lately had the headspace to finally evaluate things and think about art on a deeper level, and I keep having this epiphany that I want to work on more illustrations. Why? Because it helps me get closer to establishing myself as an artist by having a full body of work / portfolio, which helps me convey my current style, themes, interests, and skill level. Oh, and because it's fun and cool. But that said, with illustrations I've had quite the roadblock lately. I don't know what route to take in them anymore. For the longest time, right, I've done sketch, line art, flats, render, and then voila, the piece is done. But doing this on the iPad for the past several months, it feels kinda alienating. Like, I was changing, but I couldn't exactly explain why, or why I disliked that typical process anymore. I started to see myself shifting to doing more painterly styles, or even that I'd paint often as a part of the sketching process, and then I would just kinda cave and end up doing line art anyway at the end. But then, with my new fancy and first display tablet, I was like, well, before I tackle any actual illustrations, let me just test things out by drawing an illustration of one of my OCs, hence my drawing of Mira. But after that, it kind of made me spiral even more, because I was like, well, I didn't hate how it came out, but I wanted to get a better idea of what process I should go for moving forward that would be the most efficient while still getting a look that I actually like. So yeah, that's essentially what I wanted to get out of this. So what better way to establish my style and process than to dive into Draw This in Your Style, also known as dtiys, or at least that's what I call it in my head. But it's basically an art challenge where someone else has more or less already thought of the illustration components, like the character, the subject, supportive elements, colors, etc., and then you, as the other artist, can redraw it in your art style. Now I just want to note, before diving right into the challenge and picking the individual challenges that I wanted to do, I did do some art research based off of my current style versus the art style that I like the different art styles that I like to see, and then I set a goal on how to approach the illustrations. Now the art that I love can range in varying art styles, and looking back at my art versus the art that I like to look at, I learned some important things, especially revolving around line art and rendering and stuff. I basically looked at 3 styles. So line art and flats, which is my digital art foundation of style. The second one, which is a mix between painterly with some line art, which I seem to really adore. And then third is fully painterly, where I just go all out on painting and don't really worry about the cleanup. Now, I took these 3 styles and I assigned them to 3 different Draw This in Your Style prompts. In addition to that, I also wanted to try working between my tablet and my iPad because I do notice I draw differently on both of them a little bit. So I took 2 Draw This in Your Style prompts on my tablet and then 1 on my iPad. So to summarize, the point of these challenges was essentially to get a bird's eye view on my digital art style and process in hopes to review what I enjoy or don't enjoy and then reassess the way that I approach digital art as a whole. Now that all that's out the way, let's review the results. So the first prompt that I chose for this challenge was by the artist fresh_bobate. You guys have probably seen their art before. It's very beautiful, cute, iconic, and it was of this cloud girl type illustration thing. And so I was like, you know what, that is very much up my alley, as you can tell with my branding. So I was like, yeah, let me go for something a little bit more in my comfort zone. And so starting out, I do a lot of things that I normally do whenever I'm creating an illustration, which is thumbnailing and then sketching and then doing an additional sketch if needed. By the way, with these Draw This in Your Style challenges, I often like to do more than literally redraw what I see. I feel like the fun of creating a challenge like this is seeing how other artists interpret it and make it their own, which includes composition or posing setup, and you by no means have to do all of that, but in my case, since I want to really work on illustrations and improve, I kind of found it as another factor to consider. Also, because this is the first one, I actually started on it before I did that whole deep dive on researching and developing a strategy, so that's why this one goes a little bit back and forth on how I want to approach it. In the end though, I chose this one to approach as a painted line art style, but I'm not really sure if I executed it how I wanted. While I looked at a lot of different art styles and art pieces, that doesn't necessarily mean that I understood exactly how the artist took their approach, what their process was, and that can make a huge difference because it's trying to guess a recipe to something that you have no idea, like you like the taste of the outcome but you don't know how they got there and they probably went a little bit rogue from the original recipe. That's what it feels like. But my initial approach was thinking that I was going to do line art for this piece, and so I was trying that out, and I feel like my biggest roadblock lately with Procreate is the fact that I don't really know what brush I want to use for my line art. It just feels like no matter what I try, it's uncomfortable. And I'm assuming it's because of the pin pressure, but I'll get into that later. When I finally get into the more frequent part of my like newly planned approach after I do the whole deep dive and everything, you'll notice because I'm gonna start to messily sketch how I want the drawing to look, as opposed to like a nice, clean, simple sketch. Yeah, I do that, and then I think I start painting in the background. But from there it's quite interesting, because with Procreate I'm used to merging the sketch lines with the colored layer beneath it, and then I just paint away at it until I'm satisfied. But looking back, I really don't know how I've done this, because I've done it many times, but like now whenever I try to go do that, I just get so irritated because it's like you have these lines that you're covering up that you're basically painting over, but it's like I like, you know, like say if I'm rendering the skin, I want it to be like clean and consistent, and sometimes that's hard whenever like you're painting everything on one layer. I find it kind of like disjoint. I don't know, something about it is like irritating me. But I've done it before in the past. Again, I've done it many times, so I don't know if it's just something that I need to like relearn and get over or what, but I do think it's something to explore. And I feel like it's also easier whenever you have a much cleaner sketch as opposed to like it being messy, but sometimes I like that messy look. Whenever, I think it's because it feels more aesthetically pleasing whenever I go to like touch it up and like paint over it and like clean everything up, like that just feels very like nice to me. But it's not always practical. That said, what I did this time was, before I merged the sketch, I colored individual parts like the skin, hair, and outfit on separate layers, and then I duplicated and alpha locked the overall sketch layer for each of those colored layers. And then I merged it so that way each part, like the skin, the hair, and the outfit, was still separated, but I had like literal guidelines of the sketch to go off of. Because outside of some small occasions, I'm not someone who prefers to paint from nothing and simply like block colors in to create an illustration. So doing this was a way to reference where I might add shadows or highlights while still having the layers be separate, if that makes sense. And you're kind of gonna see what I mean because you'll just see like a whole gap in where the face is, or like a whole gap in where the outfit is, a whole gap where the hair is, you know, I like switch between different layers. But that's essentially what I do this time around. But one thing I noticed throughout this challenge is that no matter what, I need layers. I'm a control freak, and I need to make sure that I can access certain areas without messing up anything else if I need to. It's the beauty of digital art, in my opinion. Now, this does become frustrating whenever you want to work on everything all at once, which is the natural nature of painting. So because I paint this character with their skin and their hair and outfit, etc. on different layers, sometimes it's harder for me to envision how they work together, and they don't feel like they connect as naturally as if they would have if I did it all on like one layer. And the back and forth that you have to do of like, oh, am I on the right layer? And you keep like doing all of that, that is very stressful. So I do get why some people like to have little to no layers. Painting over things can just be a godsend, and for some reason I generally feel comfortable doing just that in Procreate, but still I tried this different approach to just mess around and find out if it might be better, but there's many things that I need to explore on this. I do want to go back to just kind of like sketch layer merged with the colored layers, and then I just paint it to perfection again like I used to, so I'll see. But you're gonna pretty much see me like I work in sections, so I work on the skin first, and then I work on the hair and the outfit. It's pretty like, that's usually what I do regardless. So like no matter what, I'm always gonna start with like skin, then hair and eyes, and then the outfit. But I've been really trying to figure out how I can condense those things sometimes, because honestly the less layers the better. So often what I'll do is I will combine two elements elements that aren't necessarily touching each other, so I can get away with painting them together. So in this case, like the hair and the outfit, usually if the character has shorter hair I can definitely get away with it, but in this case I still try to push for doing the silver hair on the same layer as like the white t-shirt and the skirt, because I'm like, yeah, sure, that shouldn't be too big of an issue. No matter what style or approach I take, for the most part I'm usually gonna have like whatever base layer something is. So like take the skin layer for example, there's like the base color of that, or what you would call the flats, and then there is like multiple clipping layers on top of that just continue to add more depth to it. That's kind of how I go about my process. But yeah, to circle back on what I was talking about earlier with Procreate and brushes, I'm just really struggling because I don't really have a comfortable brush set that's like my holy grail. And I especially feel this way with line art, but even with coloring sometimes, it's like, I don't know. I do know I tend to use the Jing Sketch Sharp Render whenever I like color and paint, but even then sometimes it just feels a bit off for me. And spoiler alert, I did find brushes that I work with much more naturally in Clip Studio Paint, but alas, that's the tragedy of how things are set up across programs and equipment sometimes, because when I say Clip Studio Paint, I'm not talking about Clip Studio Paint on my iPad, I mean like on my tablet. Something about it just clicks different. But yeah, I really want to explore with Procreate brushes for illustrations because I'd feel bad if I could only do illustrations on my tablet, which I know just isn't true because I've had my iPad for more than I've had my tablet. My tablet is something I've only had really since the beginning of this year, so I've made a ton of illustrations on Procreate beforehand and I haven't hated them, so you know. But I've definitely gained a greater favor towards my display tablet and Clip Studio Paint because of their brushes and the pen experience alone, but I don't want to fully boot out like my iPad because it's pretty convenient to take with me on the go and I don't feel like I'm incapable of creating work on it anymore. I just want to raise the experience to be like as nice as the digital tablet. As for the illustration itself, I mean, I don't hate it, but I feel like with how it came out, I kind of wanted more. It doesn't really feel like how I wanted to portray things, and that's a very common outcome to happen to artists, but in this case, I can pinpoint what and why, as I've already kind of done some of the explaining on that with like the layers approach and the painting and like the brushes. So yeah, but another thing is I was also working on this off and on. Like I said, before I started it, it was probably like over a month ago, and then I picked it up within like the past few weeks, and then I tried working on it during a power outage because of a hurricane, and that was a chaotic time, as you can imagine. But then I finally wrapped it up like a week after I got my power back. So, I can definitely say, at some points, I just kind of abandoned ship, to be honest. Again, I love the original art, it's very comfort zone, up my alley, but it just started to feel like I was getting in over my head on things. And seeing how this is only a challenge and not like a life-changing legacy content that I originally came up with, I just accepted the fact that sometimes you can let things go, you know? That said, I also don't think that I focused on the style of doing like a painterly with a mix of line art, because like, again, that's the most adored style that I've noticed I'm into. But again, that kind of art style, it can range in so many different ways. Literally all these art styles can. Like, that's the thing. An art style can range in so many different ways in general. But with these, again, it's not like I was stalking artists to see like their exact process. And not every artist posts their exact process all the time. So I was kind of just like, winging it. Well, here actually I kind of sheepishly tried to apply line art at the end over all of it, and I just ended up finding it looking to be like underwhelming and pointless anyways, so. But there was a lot of troubleshooting, or mostly just like figuring things out as I go. Like, I don't hate the hair and the eyes. The eyes actually turned out pretty cool, but I do want to revisit how I render them and I shape them and stuff, and really just everything in general. And that is going to be a recurring theme throughout this entire video, by the way. But whenever it comes to rendering in general though, I feel like clothes still definitely kick my ass. It's not like it doesn't look like clothes necessarily, but I know for sure I want to do things a different way. And rendering is one of those skills that you build best through critical thinking and review and study and all of that, at least in my opinion. Basically, it's like a hefty thing to take on, and it's also something that's like kind of ongoing in a way. But to get particular about like individual things in this piece, I hate how stiff the skirt came out. Like, I hate stiffness in general, to be honest. I really want to work on a more flowy and free sense of energy. The hair wasn't too bad on that, but the skirt I low-key want to bash my head into a wall over. But the accessories were alright, I guess. I do think I kind of cooked with like the thigh garter thing. I don't know, it just looks so nicely painted on. But the overall pose was cuter in my head. It's still kind of cute, but like the hand by her face stressed me out to paint. And the face too, I don't know, like I feel like my face style has randomly changed whenever I was doing this, like these challenges, and like I don't think it's ugly, it just doesn't feel like the aesthetic that I wanted to go for. I think it comes from having to paint a face instead of being comfortable with line art. Like I'm so used to comfortably sketching, so painting feels weird and it just feels frustrating sometimes. But again, overall I don't hate how it came out. It's fairly cute, and again, it's very up my alley with the aesthetic and the energy, so I did have fun with this prompt by fresh_bobate, so thank you. By the way, the Draw This in Your Styles are an art challenge, which means they often like have a contest going or things like that, so they'll be like, oh okay, you know, you can join by posting the tags or things like that. I don't think I insert any of these into like a competition, or I don't think, like that wasn't my purpose. I really just wanted to draw these so that way I could re-elaborate my style, so there's that. But I think the last one, it's not like I feel like I'm entering it into anything, but that one I do end up like, I guess, tagging it appropriately, if that makes sense. But we'll get to that later. To take away from this, I feel like I had a fun time. It was an interesting time. There was a lot to speculate on. And I just think that my main thing now is that I need to find my comfort zone and Procreate again. I think that'll happen if I really just work with, first just work on different art illustrations and stuff like that and don't take it too seriously, just kind of like have fun experimenting. But 2, trying out different assets, like the Procreate brushes, or seeing if there's any new brushes I can look into as well. I have a tab currently that I open like a ton of brush resources on, so I'll probably get to that soon. But I also feel like maybe the original Procreate brushes, I haven't revisited those in a while, so I don't know. But yeah, there we have it. That is how the illustration came out. Again, don't hate it, but there's many things to explore. I do enjoy doing the little clouds in the background. But moving on to the next challenge, it is by Naomi_Lord with this cute fawn character. They were simply too adorable to like not draw, so yeah. But the approach that I'm taking for this one, this is the first one that I draw on my digital tablet in Clip Studio Paint, and I will be doing this as like my original typical approach with digital art, which is like the thumbnail or messy sketch into a sketch, and then line art, and then flats, and then I render all of it. Now I felt pretty confident about this drawing, and most of the things that I experienced through it, I definitely felt more relaxed about this typical approach, and that was because of the brushes that I could use, but also the pin that goes with this Huion display tablet, because like the pin pressure on this compared to the Apple pencil, it's pretty significant to me, or at least like I don't know if it's just the way that I'm holding it or how it feels. I think it's both really, but yeah, so that makes a difference. And then also like I know brushes can't suddenly make you draw like 5,000 million times better than you normally can, but it can feel similar to like putting on clearer glasses, I guess. I mean, I don't know, I don't really wear glasses, but I guess another example is like when you upgrade a weapon for what you need in a video game. It's like you feel that sudden power spike and you're like, oh my gosh, oh, now we're playing, now we're cooking. So I don't know. But for sketching, I really could just be using whatever the heck kind of brush whenever it comes to an illustration. It doesn't really matter because it's just a sketch. Now that said, if I'm specifically going for a sketchy aesthetic, like if I'm playing around, then I might pay more attention to the brushes that I use for a sketch. But whenever it comes to line art, usually I like something a little bit more solid and sleek. In the past, I felt like my go-to was more of a consistently thick line weight, and that's because I thought that it looked better. But now I still think that there's good opportunities to use that type of style of a consistent line weight brush. And actually, the artist that I just mentioned, fresh_bobate, I'm pretty sure their art is a good example of that, where it has like this nice, clean, illustrative style. Shidoi Room too, I think. They're also an artist that kind of has like that nice, consistent line weight brush style, but I definitely learned the power of a highly varying line weight brush being paired with brush sensitivity levels. And I was anxious at first because I settled on a brush with extreme line weight variation, and I thought that it might be overwhelming. But this brush freaking ate it up for this illustration. Like, I don't know, it truly, like, at some point it felt like it was gliding on like butter. And that's not to say that I'll 100% settle on it as my go-to for line art, but I think it was very nice and it didn't hinder me at all in the process. And this was the expressive line pen, by the way, in Clip Studio Paint if you're looking for that asset. I'm pretty sure that's what it's called. But yeah, having the line weight vary can be really nice in an art style sometimes, and especially in my case where I don't want the line art to stand out too much, which is more or less what I discovered when I did my deep dive that I talked about earlier. Like, I basically realized that I prefer my line art to be on the more subtle side for illustrations, because there's a time and a place to use more like stronger line art, like if I'm going for a more comic-y style or if I'm like drawing chibis or something like that. I don't know. It just helps to focus more on the rendering and the details, or like even just the overall drawing when you look at it, whenever you have that subtle line art. And I also feel like if I do try to go for line art, it needs to be much cleaner and intentional than it has in the past. And notice that I said if, because I also feel like I enjoy when line art is sort of like beautifully woven into an illustration instead of engulfing it. And there's some occasions where I might prefer it not even be there at all. And to break it down even further about the whole talk of line art and things like that, I took some notes on multiple ways to achieve that more subtle look, where the line art blends in with the illustration subject and seems a little less obvious. One of the ways is something that I'm pretty familiar with and I've done for the past couple of years actually, but it's changing the color to match the colors near it. So some people might start out with their line art to be black, but oftentimes they will end up changing it depending on like if it's, so for example, like the skin, like if you have line art going around the face, or if you have line art for like the nose and the mouth, changing that to be more of like a warm, soft brown or red or things like that, instead of it just being like void black, you know? And I usually do that process at the end, but you can do it at any time. I just find keeping the line art in black whenever I'm working on it, it keeps it very like clear and obvious where I'm putting things. But another thing you can do is lower the opacity of the line art. This can work depending on how you go about it, because it might just end up looking where you just see all of the messy colors underneath without the line art, but there's ways around that. I think like what I initially think of when I say this is you turn on the multiply layer and then you kind of play with the opacity. Really, I also feel like this second thing that you can do goes in hand with the first one that I said. And that also brings up the point of like, instead of playing with just the opacity, you can also play with like the hue, saturation, and all of that. Mostly like the saturation and the light or darkness of the line art. And that goes really well with what I first said, which is making sure that the colors of the line art match the colors that they are going on top of. And I feel like that really helps play with how strong you want the line art to be, because the line art can be strong if you want it to. Or if you are like me and you kind of enjoy the idea of it looking more subtle, then you can play with that as well. So those are some extra ways. Another way is by painting over it or erasing it in some areas. And this is what I suspect some of the artists' like work that I was looking at did, because I'm kind of like, okay, it looks like there's some parts where the line art's there and then some parts where it looks like it was either painted over or it was erased. And then another one is simply just having thinner line art and inconsistent line art. So like, you know, say one part it's thin and then another part it's even thinner, or maybe just not even there. But yeah, those are some ways that you can do that, and feel free to play around with your line art if you're feeling also kind of like you're stuck in a rut with how it's done. That's really the best way, is to just kind of experiment with it. And speaking of experimenting, I was getting so comfortable with doing the line art that I did a secondary layer and tried out some characteristics that I normally go towards whenever I'm sketching. So like often whenever I sketch with just like pen or a pencil or whatever, I tend to sketch in shadows as well. I didn't plan on doing that, and I got worried that I was kind of jumping the gun and venturing off into something unnecessary, but the look that it gave for a majority of the illustration was so freaking cool. And I don't know, it kind of reminded me of like illustrations that are heavily ink based. I don't know how to really explain it, but like in manga work or somewhere where they fill in the areas with just ink to add depth. I don't know, it just looks very badass. But again, I'm not saying this is like the best thing ever, but I haven't liked my line art like this in such a long freaking time. Like when I tell you I was in absolute awe at what I drew, I was like, how did this happen? But speaking of sketching habits, one thing I want to work on is not doing my typical like sketch line habits when I go to do line art. So like, it's that habit of making multiple strokes for one line, In this case, I got away with it a bit, but I do want to see if I can try to cut that out and just make confident, long, smooth, yet dynamic lines and more concise strokes, because it will likely look better or more appropriate for like the looks that I specifically want to go for. As for the coloring, I mean, this is the underwhelming part, to be honest. It's just filling in the colors and coloring them on each layer. But that said, I was so shocked at how much I enjoyed rendering the hair. Like, first I like the line art, and I like how I render the hair. Who am I? I don't know, I just like, what? But yeah, I definitely had to look up double braids and properly reference how they worked, but it did turn out nicely. So I'll have to take notes on this whenever I do more studies on how I want to render hair, because that's another thing that I need to revisit. Again, like I said, hair, eyes, just about everything. Yeah, but one gripe I have when it comes to coloring though is like making sure each and every pixel is truly filled. Now this drives me crazy every time, no matter what program I use, because it's so hard to get it perfect. Like lately in Procreate, I've been using the lasso tool to just sort of select and fill areas in, as opposed to like, oh, I did line art, time for me to like select the areas of the line art that are inside and I can just casually fill it up. Nope, it does not work like that. It does not look nearly clean and precise as you would expect it to. And I have the same issues in Clip Studio Paint. But on this specific drawing, I was wondering if I was just lazy, because I know there's like select tools you can actually use, and I did download that one tool where you can like circle an area and then it fills it in based on the line art. But one, I feel like I need to look into how to use it more, and then two, I feel like it works best whenever you have super clean line art, which in my case with my sketchy lines that was not really happening, so. But the rendering definitely felt more comfortable than the previous challenge, and this could be several things. It's likely the fact that there's line art to complement it, to be honest, but I don't really know. My rendering in general is like airbrushing or creating like a gradient over the flat layer, and then adding multiple layers of shadows of varying strengths, and then softly incorporating highlights where I see fit. However, as I've been saying multiple times throughout this video, rendering is something that I need to revisit and look into, but it's such a hefty topic that a deep dive on that alone could take like a few weeks, if not months. My biggest gripe with this illustration is that I wish I paid attention to the color scheme more before just jumping in with my interpretations. Like, I know that might be a common thing for artists when they work on a Draw This in Your Style challenge. You know, we just come up with different colors, but I feel like I was simply just not consciously thinking about it. The original art colors is so cute with like the way the character is and stuff like that, and I didn't realize until I was like hella deep into this drawing that I was like, okay, the colors that I've chose for this don't really match the way that this originally looked. So, and I was just too far in to want to redo the colors again, so I went back and forth on like the tonal correction and adjusting the hues and brightness and saturation, and the way that this illustration turns out is like, it's a good example as to why those things cannot save you in the end. All of the shading and the highlights that I did appealed to that original specific base color, and even though I changed the tone of like the shadows and the highlights as well to match it, it's still just like not the same. Like, it's just giving uncanny valley. And I want to do a video going over skin tone specifically in rendering it, because I feel like people could really use that, and also because I too want to reevaluate it with my whole rendering adventures. But yeah, that's a shame. I mean, luckily you guys see a majority of this process with it being like the way that I liked how it looked versus how it looks afterwards. But overall, I want to say that I think that this Draw This in Your Style was really fun and very cute to work on. I also had so much fun with the line art and just pulling everything together bit by bit. I do think that there's things to work on in Clip Studio, but I know for sure that my old approach is still doable, and that I just have several things to work on. My line art, color filling, as well as color picking, and then also layer management. And I also want to work more on characters that have like horns or other interesting attributes. You know, like the small things that you don't really think of because they're not in most typical character designs. I don't know, it's something that I'd love to incorporate in like my own future designs. So yeah, this is how it turned out. It was very fun, very cute. Again, like, it's not horrible with the change, but I initially liked the original better before I changed everything. And last but certainly not least is the Draw This in Your Style challenge by Itosa. And this one I was really excited for because it felt pretty unique. And this is gonna sound shady, but for most of these challenges that I came across on the Instagram tag, they all kind of had the same energy, and I'm not gonna elaborate on that much, but I will say that I was quite psyched to draw Catboy as always. I also feel like because it was from Itosa, who's an artist who I know to have a very vibrant and playful illustrative style, I was very excited to take this on. And because of that colorful graphic illustration style, I specifically wanted to take the full painterly approach on this, and that's simply because it is such a drastic change in comparison to the original drawing. So it's kind of like the very first Draw This in Your Style that I showed, because both of them come from artists who their style is a little bit more like 2D and illustrative, very graphic, as opposed to it being like very like loose painterly and all of that. And it's funny because similar to the first one as well, the separation of the elements whenever I render them, it makes things look too neat or too clean, if that makes sense. So, and I guess like spoiler alert for whenever I go to color these, whenever I'm coloring the layers, like the skin, the clothes, all of that, similar to the first one, I do it all on individual layers because again, I just like layers. The problem is, it's like I said, whenever you're working with a more painterly style, it works better when everything is all on one layer because it just has a more it flows better basically. And I had initially meant to do that, but it's only towards the very end that I merge all the layers whenever I'm doing like little touch-ups and also adding line art as well at the end, which kind of goes against the whole like painterly style approach where I wasn't supposed to necessarily have line art, but I digress. Again, the way that I initially started to get into a more painterly style was on Procreate whenever I would take a decently sketched layer and then merge it with a briefly colored layer underneath of the entire illustration. And from there I would just, again, I'd clean it up until I see fit. And that works so well because it has this sense of like dynamic energy. It has texture, it has life into it. When everything is separated on its own layer and then you try to piece it together at the end, again, the colorful elements in this illustration, they still end up feeling too reserved for what I wanted. It's like being too formal at a casual party or something, you know, like why did you come in a tuxedo? We're supposed to just be chilling in like a cardigan or some jeans. What happened? But setting up the drawing was very fun. I think I really enjoyed how I interpreted the drawing into my own composition and stuff. And obviously I had to make the cloud as a little stage or something for the character to sit on because that's just my thing. I really like clouds, but I also liked adding in the roller coaster tracks and then the flags. I did consider adding in the castle that I saw in the original illustration, but then I was like, that's a lot of work and I also don't know if it's gonna look good and it also just might mess everything up. But I will say it would have been good to work on the sketch more because one thing that I keep doing is shooting myself in the foot essentially by not giving more care to the sketch. In this case it was really important because I wasn't going to do line art afterwards, so the rest I'm simply coloring based off of the sketch. So basically I realized some places weren't defined enough by the sketch and then I had to go back and then sketch those areas in properly. Honestly, even if I'm doing line art, it's good not to like BS the sketch. You gotta take proper steps in advance and then you won't have to struggle later on. It's like when you are making a video, you know, it's better to fix a video while you can before you have to edit it, because doing that whole, oh, I'm gonna fix it in post BS is like not probable and it really only makes it harder for the future version of you, so. But speaking of preparation, I did go the extra mile this time with the color fill and I made sure that just about every area was filled in properly before I moved on to rendering. So the flats, even though you'd think that they're the easiest part of the process, I had to really hone down on things. And a lot of it was like changing the background colors to make sure that no gaps were present. But it paid off because I'm pretty sure I experienced like no more than a few occasions where like a very tiny spot was uncolored or something. As for the rendering process, I mean, oh my goodness, there was so much time. Like the total time for this illustration was literally 25 hours. I don't think that was necessary by any means, but low-key, I was kind of having fun with it. I'm not sure how to feel about the outcome on this, but working on an illustration truly isn't as menacing as my brain always makes it out to be. It's simply something that just takes time. What made this piece so enjoyable is the same reason it made it exhausting, and that's all the little details. The fashion in itself was like so wacky and fun. I mean, the asymmetrical items and then like the endless accessories. I noticed excessive details is one of the traits that I find in a handful of the artists that I really admire, but it truly is no joke when I say it takes so much time, work, and dedication to be doing stuff like that, especially if you want it to be well executed. I think it'd be fun to try it again, but maybe less details to start out with and then work my way up when I'm feeling more up to the challenge. But the shoes are one of my favorite attributes of this illustration, probably because I don't normally draw shoes, or like I'm not confident in drawing shoes, but like coming up with a design based off of what I could somewhat see in the original illustration was kind of fun. I do feel like I could have tidied up the shoelaces a little bit better because they look kind of out of place, but alas. But again, you really might not notice it because I get to them last, but the accessories, oh my gosh, like it truly is fun and taxing at the same time. But I really like that aesthetic, and I'm pretty sure I've said before that I wanted to try out like decora styles and stuff more in the future, so we'll see how that goes at some point. But it's just so crazy how long this took working on throughout the week. And it's kind of funny because I'd feel like I did so much work for a day and then I look back and I hadn't even touched the background at all, so I don't know. But also this drawing was kind of like a fun little kanji lesson, which I definitely could have used because I haven't been studying much Japanese lately and I need to get back to it. My kanji knowledge and my vocabulary in general could barely guess what the sign was saying, but it did seem like a familiar, like typical thing, or like something that I've seen in like anime skits before, where it's kind of like a person has a sign either in front of them or like around their neck, where it's kind of like a punishment or it's like a reflection on their actions. And if I can tell correctly, the original art has it saying that the character had a lot of fun, or maybe too much fun, at the amusement park. But it's very cute, especially the character's demeanor. Like, I wish I captured that better. That's another thing too. But lastly, another thing for the art process on this illustration, throughout the coloring of this character, I kept on the sketch layer that I had initially did, but I had the opacity really low and it was on a multiply blend mode. And this was incredibly helpful for having a guideline while still seeing like how I was painting and rendering the character. Towards the end, I hid that sketch layer and then I grouped all the layers together, and then I merged all of them into one layer. Like I said, and then that was whenever I started adding a layer on top to sort of add actual small touches of line art. It was mostly in the eyes, and then I did like the little finishing touches. And I will say doing the line art and stuff on a separate layer was kind of helpful because it wasn't like fully committal, and that's more or less why I like doing layers, because it's not really like you're not committing to anything. But my overall thoughts and things that I learned, again, I'm not really sure how to feel about this whole illustration. I mean, looking at it now, even though I recorded the whole process, for some reason it doesn't even feel like I created that whole drawing. Like, it almost feels like I blacked out because I only vaguely remember my hours of like tunnel visioning on it. And there was so much to render and review. But again, I just love the maximum detail approach, and I think it's really cool, but oh my gosh, the effort that it takes to do that. It's not quite where I want my style to be, but I am happy simply being able to like draw this illustration at all, because this is something that I definitely wouldn't have imagined that I could do. So I would for sure call it an advancement for my skills. It's like I have the right direction, I just need to like keep things together and sort of develop stuff a lot more. But I feel like the background elements too, I don't know, it just really makes it feel lively and fun for the character that's already so vibrant and cool on his own. Also, I just want to say that I was like so shook when Itosa had shared this to their Instagram stories and they had retweeted it on Twitter. Like, I wanted to fall out of my chair and like scream at the sky, because I was like, are you kidding me? Like, this really amazing artist like noticed me for 2 seconds. Is this what it feels like to live and exist? I was just like freaking out for the longest time because I'm like, does anyone not realize how amazing that is? I don't know. Maybe I'm overreacting, but I think that's really sweet and awesome because like for the other 2 prompts, I didn't tag the original artist in the post because it was already outside of the challenge time limit and all of that. So, and I just, in general, I don't really like tagging artists in my posts, even if it's like they encourage it, because it feels awkward and I feel like I'm being annoying. In this case, with this one though, I was like, okay, sure, whatever, I'll just try it out. And yeah, no, I was really shook. because in general, whenever I post online, it just kind of feels like I'm posting into the void. And so I wasn't really expecting anyone to like look at this drawing that I spent 25 hours on. But that said, you know, for the original artist to like notice it and like retweet it and say that they like the eyes, I was like, I'm going to fling myself into the sun after this. I cannot believe this happened. That's amazing. So yeah, but please go follow Itosa, or at least check out their art if you haven't seen it yet, because again, like, they're really amazing. I especially like their characters that they draw and like their layouts and stuff. It's very appealing, but then also just like their style in general. But yeah, to wrap all of this up, there's still so much to learn, experiment, and develop moving forward on terms of like my art process and closing that gap of what style and process I want to draw with versus like where I'm currently at. But this has been a huge help in not only launching that journey deeper, but also just being comfortable working on illustrations, which some of you may know is something that I tend to struggle with constantly, so I hope to keep going with this momentum and deliver some exciting art in the future. This was probably a lot of technical information, so sorry if that was overwhelming or your eyes glazed over, but let me know if you've been thinking about anything like this lately, such as like switching up your style or trying out different methods to illustrate something. Speaking of trying out different methods, that intro part of the video, that was the first time that I did one of those explainer drawings you might have seen in other videos, especially like animatics, except I'm not animating all that. But let me know what you thought. Did it make it more entertaining to listen to as opposed to like just us jumping in the time lapses like I've probably done in the past? Because I might do it more often, but we'll see. I'm also wondering, after this, would y'all be interested if I hosted my own Draw This in Your style in the future? I'm not sure what I'd create, but I definitely want it to be like as fun and nice as these challenges I've tried were. So yeah, we'll see. But that's enough yapping from me, as this video is longer than I want it to be. It's now 1 AM, I'm malnourished, and I'm going to have to play that new Wuthering Waves update before I pass out. Well, thank you guys so much for watching today's video. If you enjoyed your time here today, please feel free to leave a like. If you're interested to see more of my content, you can always check out my other videos and subscribe. For reference, if you're new, I am Rhea, or Etheria, and I like making art and art-related content on my channel. I do try to post weekly videos, but if you'd like more timely updates, you can always check out my other social media linked in the description or also at the end of the video. But who knows, I might just upload more on YouTube and have that be it. But until next time, once again, thank you guys so much for watching, and I wish you a nice rest of your day and or week. Take care.